Hello. Today, I'm going to be talking about a part of the world that might not be terribly familiar, the eastern reaches of the South Caucasus. Sandwiched between the Greater Caucasus and the Lesser Caucasus, with Russia to the north and Turkey and Iran in the modern context. 2,000 years ago, we know that a group of Roman soldiers came here to what is today Kobustan in Azerbaijan. They looked out over the Caspian Sea, and they left behind this inscription, attesting to their presence and that of the Roman centurion Lucius Iulius Maximus and his 12th Legio Fulminata at this place, sometime between 84 and 96 CE. This is remarkably the easternmost Latin military inscription from the Roman world. It comes from a region rife today, as it was in the Roman period, with internal strife and contested borders. The land is divided now into three nation-states of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. But two portions of Georgia are currently under Russian control, including South Ossetia, the subject of the 2008 Georgia-Russia war. Meanwhile, there's continued fighting between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, shown here, including a war of words that sometimes plays out over Twitter, as it did this summer, when the Azerbaijani president appeared to declare war by tweet. When President Aliyev here refers to our native lands, he's appealing to the history of the classical period in Azerbaijan, particularly the history of Caucasian Albania, conveniently the subject of my dissertation. Across all of the Caucasus today, the boundaries between modern and ancient history are tissue thin, and both histories are deeply contested. In the Roman period, this region was situated on the edge between east, west, and the steppe, between the Romans, the Parthians, and the Sarmatians. My dissertation looks at the role of the Sarmatians, a steppic group related to the Scythians from the North Caucasus and the Eurasian steppe, in the development of Caucasian Albania and Caucasian Iberia, the two polities of eastern South Caucasia. The Sarmatians are an important but understudied neighbor of the Romans, best known for their exceptional metalwork. The only Scythians, however, who regularly appear in modern assessments of Roman history are those fighting along the Danube. The Caucasian Sarmatians are pretty much ignored. In fact, they played a critical role in structuring Rome's eastern policy and its fight against Arsacid Parthia. The Roman-Parthian conflict, the longest-running conflict of the Roman world, is nevertheless very difficult to fully understand on the basis of textual sources today. I argue that the Sarmatians are the missing piece of this puzzle, and that archaeology gives us the ability to give them back their central position. In this project, I'm intentionally collapsing the artificially constructed boundaries of the Roman Empire in order to look not at prescriptive understandings of the borderland, but rather at networks of interaction and at the space between cultural groups. I should say at the outset that I never thought that I'd be working on a dissertation in the South Caucasus before I began at Penn. The region was not familiar to me. I had no idea about the really bewildering ethno-linguistic diversity. I didn't appreciate the critical role that this area played in the spread of Christianity, and I had no idea about the incredible and deep literary culture that goes back to the Middle Ages. My first glimpse of all of this came as a participant on Penn's Dr. Rizvit's own archaeological project at Alangala in Nakhchivan, shown here. Nakhchivan is an exclave of Azerbaijan, because we have exclaves in the South Caucasus. Dr. Rizvit, along with her Azerbaijani collaborators Veli Bakhshilayev and Safar Asharov, has been investigating the remains of an Iron Age fortress system on top of this hill and in the surrounding region. And they found some amazing material from the Roman Parthian period, which first sparked my interest. Sometime in the early centuries of our era, a man died here and was buried, according to local style, in a locally produced pithos. Interred with him were the objects shown here, which include a Roman coin of Augustus and Roman glass, possibly from a production center in Syria, along with gem-encrusted finger rings. Isotopic studies of the remains of this individual, carried out by doctoral student and project participant Salid Nugent, currently at The Ohio State University, have shown that the man had not grown up in the area, but had instead traveled there far away, possibly somewhere in the Aegean. Yet, like so many others in this region, he was buried in a way that combined local customs with markers of his international connection. Why did these choices make sense to him and to those around him? Right now, we have insufficient synthetic analysis of the region to understand the social context that led to these choices. The sidelining of the Caucasus from wider studies of the Roman world and the resultant gap in our own understanding is really a story about 20th century history. Early classical archaeologists, both in Europe and in Russia, understood the importance of this area, with the site at Garni holding particular appeal. During the 20th century, however, the South Caucasus was part of the Soviet Union, and there was obviously little scholarly exchange between archaeologists working on opposite sides of the Iron Curtain. This is exacerbated today by the continuing lack of bilingual archaeologists. There is, however, a fairly considerable body of scholarship on this material by Azerbaijani researchers, both in the Soviet and post-Soviet systems. While I will be conducting some new fieldwork in the course of my dissertation, my project is actually conceived of as a sort of archive archaeology, where I'll be working on the deep foundations of prior work in the region and connecting this to data from other parts of the Roman world. So this summer, I spent 4.5 months in the Caucasus doing a combination of advanced Russian and Georgian language coursework and pre-dissertation research with the support of the American Research Council in the South Caucasus and under the auspices of the Georgian National Museum and the Azerbaijan National Academy of Sciences. I spent a lot of time sitting in archaeological libraries, as one does. But I also visited many archaeological sites and regional museums to get a better sense of the totality of this material. In what follows, I'm going to show you a sample of the most important material from Eastern South Caucasia that can address the questions about Caucasian social context. I'm going to particularly focus on the capital cities of Iberia and Albania. Archaeological remains from the sites, as you will see, could not be more different. And I'll be suggesting that one way to understand these differences is through an appreciation for the role that the Sarmatians played in Central and Eastern South Caucasia, respectively. So we go first to Iberia. Armazi, which is the ancient name for the capital of Iberia, is located right near the modern spiritual heart of Georgia, Nsketa. Here, at the confluence of the Gvari and the Aragvi rivers, the dynasts of the Georgian kingdom of Kartli built their first capital around the 3rd century BC. Today, the landscape is dominated by the 6th century Gvari monastery and the soaring 11th century Svetskhitoveli cathedral. The best preserved remains dating to the 1st and 2nd century CE are perched on this hilltop terrace overlooking the river. This is a site plan and a possible reconstruction of what this region might have looked like. The structures include 2 small bathhouses, a probable temple, and a columnar structure often interpreted as a treasury, although there's very little evidence for what this actually was. Excavations have been carried out here since the 1940s and are ongoing today. The most recent phase of work is being done by Dr. Vakhtan Nikolaishvili of the Institute of Archaeology, who's investigating mud brick structures near the treasury. Formal characteristics of these buildings, and particularly the bathhouses, leaves little doubt about the role of Roman architectural styling, and the hydraulic lime mortar used in their construction points to the possible role of actual Roman builders in the area, although there's no way to be sure. Some inscriptionary evidence from Armazi, however, does suggest a certain role that is often taken to suggest the role of the Roman army in the construction of local fortifications. In any case, not far away at Samtavros Cemetery, years of excavations have uncovered a truly incredible array of rich tombs showing a different iteration of local international interaction, particularly in the form of many fine imported grave goods, attesting to close connections with both the Roman and the Iranian Parthian worlds. Some contemporary graves from this same site are, interestingly, actually markedly Sarmatian. I don't have any pictures of these, but there are a number of tombs that have skeletons displaying intentionally elongated skulls, which is a practice known from the North Caucasus. At present, it's really difficult to determine the degree of Sarmatian material in this cemetery, but that's a goal of my dissertation. With regards to the Sarmatians, a critical function of Armazi may have been control of this mountain pass leading to the north, the Darial Pass. The pass, still in use today, located in the Darial looks kind of like this. So you can get a sense of the really dramatic landscape here. The first capital of Georgia was located in a perfect point for controlling the movement of travelers along this route. But material culture from Armazi shows relatively few markers of these northern peoples. Indeed, all along the Oragvi and Mkvari rivers, there is first century evidence of construction activity that is distinctly Roman. In this, the sites of Urbanisi and Ublistiche are particularly important, and there's a lot of material from the modern capital of Tbilisi, although it's difficult to access because of overbuilding. The other most important site is Zalisi, a domestic complex with several baths, and probably the single most Roman structure from all of Georgia. Discovered in the 1970s and awaiting further exploration, it includes several baths. This is one of them. This is a large pool, and this is one of the large, probable reconstruction of one of the halls, and some of the most stunning mosaics from the entire region. Who lived in this complex? Why did he or she build it in such a markedly Roman style? Well, these questions are impossible to answer. Fieldwork that I'll be conducting at Zalisi in the spring will take a new look at the hydraulic systems of the complex. With this work, I hope to understand the phasing of the structure more clearly, and also take a new look at whether the hydraulic system follows Roman practice very closely or whether it displays some local innovation. The bath houses that are built at Tbilisi are quite different from baths that we see in other parts of the Roman world, but this one hasn't been studied in that light. So in any case, it's clear even from this overview that Armazi sat at the heart of a landscape full of traces both of Roman presence, but also, and maybe more importantly, of Roman style. If we turn to the capital of Caucasian Albania, located here at Gabala, we find quite a different situation. Gabala is nested right up against the greater Caucasus, and it likely also controlled northern movement through the mountains. Although it's fairly close to Armazi, it's about 150 miles away, it followed a completely different cultural logic. It was the regional capital for 600 years in the Middle Ages, and the towers that you see here date to that period. At that point, it was a really vast, important sort of megalopolis in the region, such as one could have, and a very important commercial center. In the Roman period, it was likely the site that Ptolemy names as the capital of Caucasian Albania, although that attribution is a little bit unclear. The remains from the classical period, however, are pretty difficult to interpret. Unlike in Armazi, where the material testifies to intensive interaction with Greco-Roman practices and particularly building forms, Gabala seems to be a world unto itself. The most massive buildings from this period are three huge oblong structures, 1, 2, 3, of deeply uncertain function that have no clear parallels anywhere. The foremost classical archaeologist in Azerbaijan and the excavator of the site, Dr. Ilyas Babayev, suggests that these were ceremonial centers of some sort, and that they date between the late 2nd century BC and the 1st century CE. Interestingly, they were built on a foundation of earlier wine storage cellars. So, do with that what we will. The other large structure from this period, the other sort of piece of monumental architecture from Gabala, is this long hall, of which unfortunately very little remains today because most of it has been taken away in the practice of later archaeology. This building is usually interpreted as a temple, but it's pretty difficult to know what to do with it. Again, there are no clear parallels for this. There are no bath complexes from the territory of Caucasian Albania, and there's no urban settlement of the type that we see in Armazi, although several urban settlements, particularly Galatepe, as well as other parts of Gabala, show really extensive 4th to 6th century use of hydraulic engineering, so it's possible that these systems may be more widespread than we currently recognize. In any case, it's tempting to interpret the difference between the monumental forms of these capital cities as indicative of different levels of cultural development, with the Iberian center being more developed than its eastern neighbor. Indeed, this is the approach that many have taken, in a tradition that stretches all the way back to the ancient period and to Strabo, who claimed that the Albanians were so wild that they didn't know what coined money was. This is an accusation that is demonstrably false, and in fact, patterns of monetary use in Caucasian Albania and Caucasian Iberia are pretty similar. So I suggest that it's time for us to move past this rather outdated analytical framework. What we're seeing here is is not different levels of cultural development, but rather different choices about cultural alignment. For although the physical forms of monumental architecture at Armadzi and Gabala are very different, and the kings of Kartli incorporated more obvious elements from the south and the west, while the kings of Albania looked somewhere else, the physical building materials from the two sites are almost identical. This is true for decorative elements, like columns, column bases from Iberia, column bases from Albania. And it's also true for all of the building materials, roof tiles, bricks, really it runs the gamut. The pipes from the 4th century also identical across the entire region. As at Armadzi, there's a necropolis located near Gabala. While it doesn't have the same level of really elite material as the one from Iberia, many other classes of grave goods seem really similar. These you find in Iberia as well. Obviously, Roman glass like this is very common. Some of these pendant shapes have identical parallels in Iberia. And, although not from a secure archaeological context, there are some examples of luxury silver from Azerbaijan in styles familiar from the pieces from Iberia, which suggests that the elite gift exchange relationships that brought this material to the Caucasus were not confined to Iberia. At the same time, there are other objects in the necropolis of Albania, of Azerbaijan, that are entirely unique, like these zoomorphic raita, which seem to have either Iranian or Sarmatian roots. What I'm arguing then is that the residents of Caucasian Albania were not less developed than those of Iberia, but were rather engaged in different networks of interaction than the Iberians, ones that drew them more closely, perhaps, to their northern neighbors and less to the Romans. When we talk about borderlands, we often talk about binaries, Roman, Parthian, Sarmatian. But as the situation in the Caucasus demonstrates, this conceptual framework doesn't capture the range of borderland decision-making. And we do better not to talk about identity, but rather about choice and networks of interaction. In the Roman period, in the South Caucasus, local dynasts built bath complexes in a Roman manner and drank from cups imported from Parthia, or made after a Sarmatian style. They wrote inscriptions in Greek declaring their alliances to Rome, but they traded using Parthian coins. These negotiations were locally contingent, and they played out differently in Iberia and in Albania. What is at stake in this study of the region is actually our understanding of the systems of interaction that developed at the edge of the Roman Empire more generally. The permeable boundaries between ancient and modern in the Caucasus, though, hold an important lesson for us in our study of the ancient world. Local stakeholders often hold vastly different, even opposing perceptions about their own identity and their networks of interaction. It's our own distant archaeological perspective that flattens out this complexity, and we do well to push back against the totalizing understandings of these rich and entwined histories.